let's get into it. Y'all with me? Y'all awake? Anybody have stay up late watching the World Cup last night? You can admit to that? No? Nobody? Okay, good. Then you're all rested. Let's go. So here's a question that I have today. The question that I really want to ask you today is, what would you do for a maybe? What would you do for a maybe? In other words, if there was something that seemed worth it, something that you really wanted, how far would you go to go after that thing, even if there was no guarantee that even with your best effort, you would get that thing? There was no guarantee you would succeed. How far would you go for the possibility of that? And I ask that today because we're going to lean into a word, the title of the message today. We're leaning into one single word. It's a small word. The word is perhaps. You say this word with me today? Perhaps. Perhaps is like this word that's like, it's a combination word of a little bit of uncertainty and then a whole lot of possibility. Perhaps. I believe, and I want to suggest today, that this word perhaps is a deeply spiritual word. A word that's more spiritual than you may realize because it's a word that invites us into something. It invites us into a risk-taking kind of faith. It invites us into opportunities and encounters that you will never experience on the other side of it. It invites us to walk through doors and bust over walls into new experiences and accomplishments, as well as challenges and lessons that we will never experience if we stay on the safe side of perhaps. And my prayer today, and I believe that it's God's hope for you today, is that you will open your heart to embrace both the possibilities and the uncertainty of risk-taking faith. So there's this line in a book that we've been reading together, that we read together as a church staff, and it's just this line that I can't get out of my head, and this is what it says. It says, some goals are so worthy that it's glorious to even make the attempt. Some goals are so worthy that it's glorious to even make the attempt. I think there are things like that in life. I think there's some things that are just so worth it that we look at it and we think, man, if I could get that, if I could accomplish this, that vision is so worthy. It's so worth it that taking the risk and going after that, it's worth it. The risk itself is worth it, win or lose. Fail or succeed. I think there are several stories like that in the Bible, and so many of them revolve around that little word, perhaps. And the one that I want to tell you about is the story of a man named Caleb. Caleb was a guy who was born and raised in slavery back in the days when Israel was under the thumb of Egypt. And he grew up Caleb's every day was making bricks for his master and trying to meet a quota and getting whipped when he didn't meet his quota. And then when Caleb was about in his late 20s, early 30s, this guy named Moses showed up on the scene and claimed that God had sent him to free the people, to deliver Caleb and all of the Israelites out of slavery and get them out of Egypt. We don't know what Caleb thought about this. Moses said, I'm going to not only get you out of Egypt, but I'm also going to lead you into a brand new, good and flourishing land, a promised land that's going to be all your own land. We don't know if Caleb was skeptical or if he was hopeful when Moses first showed up making all these claims, but we know that somewhere along the line, something clicked for Caleb. You know, when the miracles started to happen, when they really did leave Egypt, when manna showed up from heaven and fire led them by night and the cloud led them by day. When they began to see these things somewhere along the line, Caleb became a true believer. And we know this because everything that we read about Caleb is that he was a man of risk-taking faith. That marked his life, which interestingly did not mark the lives of the rest of his generation. His peers, he stood out from his peers. How many know sometimes it's important to stand out from your peers? He stood out from his peers because, in fact, the rest of the people in his generation who were all who all saw the exact same things that Caleb saw, they're actually known as being stiff-necked and rebellious. Like, that's what's on their gravestone, stiff-necked and rebellious. But Caleb was different. The people that he was around, these stiff-necked and rebellious people, God was patient with them. And he led them he led them out of Egypt, and it took them 2 years to get to the border of this promised land that God had in mind for them. The whole way across this, from Egypt to the border of that promised land, a place called Kadesh. From Egypt to Kadesh, they crumbled against their leaders. They complained about their situation. They accused God and complained against God, but God was patient with them. He got them all the way across. So 2 years later, out of Egypt, here they are, and they're about to go into the promised land. And God said, all right, now it's time. I want you to go into this promised land. And look, I'm going to be with you. In fact, God said, I'm going to go ahead of you. I'm going to guarantee your victory. I'm going to go with you, and I'm going to give you this land. You just need to take that risk of obeying me and go into this land. Well, Moses, he rallied the people, and they said, okay, we're going to do this. But before we do this, we're going to send in spies. We're going to send 12 spies into this land, and we're going to check it out. So one of those spies was this guy named Caleb. Caleb got to be one of the spies to go in and check out this land before they came in and took it over. Another guy was a friend of Caleb's named Joshua. These two guys, Joshua was just like Caleb. He was also a man of risk-taking faith. And then there were 10 other guys. Like their names are listed in the Bible, but no one has ever named their kids after these 10 other guys. Because these 10 other guys, they were the stiff-necked and rebellious kind. They did not share Caleb and Joshua's faith. In fact, when they all got back, Moses wanted a report, and unfortunately, it was the 10 guys who spoke up first. And we read about what they said in Numbers chapter 13. It says that they gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. And then they went out and they spread this bad news to everybody, to the whole community. They said, look, we saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak, the Anakim. Not Skywalker, a different Anakin. We saw the Anakin come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Now, for a frame of reference, the Nephilim, we read about them in the book of Genesis. In one of those, what in the world is going on passages of the Bible. How many of the Bible have some of those, who can you make sense of this? This is what it says in Genesis 6:4. It says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God went to the daughters of mankind and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. So there are some traditions that say that this is what it sounds like, that these were fallen angels who had babies with human women, and these were their offspring. Most and other scholars say, no. Look, it's just being poetic, saying that, look, there were some really big men and some really big women, and they had some really big babies. The point is, whatever the Nephilim were, there was a mystique about them. And when they saw them, it impacted how they felt about themselves. When they saw them, they were gripped with fear. They were terrified. And it changed their whole perspective. Most importantly, it changed their perspective of how they saw themselves. So this past week, we were with some friends in South Africa, and we went to the Kruger. Am I saying that? Kroger? To the Kruger. And we were in this is not something that you do in New York City. We were in a completely open vehicle, like no ceiling, you guys are like, yeah, right. Yeah, that makes sense. So not normal for us. Anyway, we were in there, and we were driving around the bush and looking for animals. And here's the first, we got to see an elephant. Amazing. And then, amazingly close. You hear that? That's the guide whistling, saying, no, 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 no. He decided he wanted to go that way. So that was wild. We were that close to being flipped by that bull elephant. Well, then the next day we went out early in the morning and we just saw the beautiful sunrise. You can go to the next video. And then some beautiful lions, lionesses, just watching them. And then they're watching us. And that felt very different. That felt very, very different. Beautiful, though. Oh, you can go to the next one. And then this was kind of the culmination. We went out at night. They said, hey, you know what's even better? Be in the darkness of night. And that's when we saw this guy who was eating a zebra. And oh wait, could you pause this? Can you might not be able to. I want you to, because Carrie has commentary in this one that I think is very important. You'll hear a voice in this one, and this is my wife. Go ahead, let's start this over. Okay. He's protecting his food, by the way.
Oh.
And then he notices us.
Oh. Oh.
Oh. Like, this is all fun and games until, when the spies were on their own safari in the promised land, they were walking through and then they saw the Nephilim and they said, oh. These guys made us feel very small, they said. They made us feel very inadequate. We were like grasshoppers in our own eyes. I'm sure we looked that way to them too. Fear will do that, right? When there's something, and even if God has called you to that something, sometimes we look at the circumstances, we look at the obstacles, we look at the enemies, we look at the things that stand between us and what God has called us to do, and we say, oh, the fear changes the way we feel. The spies said, look, it's just like God said, the place is filled with milk and honey. It's beautiful, it's gorgeous, but the walls are too high, the city's too big. What God's asking us to do is too hard. And to top it off, there are these giants of some kind, and we don't even know what they are, but they're out to eat us. And we are too weak. We can't do this. I don't know if you've ever felt that way. Well, here comes Caleb in that moment. And in the midst of all of this report, Caleb stands up, this man of risk-taking faith. And he stands up to Moses, before Moses, and he silences the people. And he says, no. We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. And then he gets the whole community together and he says, look, this land that we passed through, we explored it. It's exceedingly good. And if the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land. It's flowing with milk and honey, and God will give it to us. Only, he says, please, listen, I know you're afraid. I know it seems too big. I know you feel too small. Only promise me, do not rebel against the Lord. Don't be afraid of the people of this land, because we're going to be the ones to devour them. Their protection is gone, see? Because the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Caleb was saying, look, I know it's scary, but the goal is so worthy that it'll be glorious just to make the attempt. So let's go. Let's take it. Because here's what Caleb knows, and this is what I want you to walk away with today. This right here is that God rewards the risk of obedience. Caleb knew it's true. I want you to know it's true. God rewards the risk of obedience. We stand And we are sitting in a place, in a building that we could not afford, that is completely paid off, that we didn't have the money to buy. But we said yes because God rewards the risk of obedience. And he is the one who responded to the risk-taking faith to make today possible. Now, rah, 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 Caleb makes this impassioned speech, but the bad report wins out. People, they say, listen, we trust these 10 other guys. And so they refused to go into the promised land. In fact, they tried to impeach Moses as their leader. They tried to kill Caleb. They even accused God of deliberately just trying to kill them and destroy them there in that desert, which, as patient as God had been with them all the way up to that point, that was the last straw. And God said, you know what? If you don't want the promised land, you won't enter the promised land. This is just a little word of warning, of love. God gives us what we want. God will give us what we want. And if we refuse to take his promises, he will allow us to not take his promises. And so he said that this generation will wander. In fact, this generation will never enter the promised land. They will spend the next 38 years of their lives wandering around the desert until they all die. Everybody 20 years and older from that point forward was going to die in the desert. Everybody except, God said, Caleb and Joshua, because he saw their risk-taking faith. In fact, he says about Caleb, you know what, my servant Caleb, he has a different spirit and he follows me wholeheartedly. So I will bring him into the land that he went to. And I'm going to give his descendants will inherit it. How many want to be the people that God says, no. He has a different spirit. She has a different spirit. They follow me wholeheartedly. So it's heartbreaking that this generation who was made for more, God's plan for them was to go from Egypt and into the promised land. Instead, they get out of Egypt. This is supposed to be the next chapter of their story. Instead, they miss God's promises and they wander. They spend the rest of their lives wandering in anonymity. And when I say in anonymity, I mean like there's nothing written about them. Like there's about 3 books of the Bible that cover this part right here. 2 years. The next 38 years is just a blip. It's kind of like just passed over. There's hardly anything about it. We just move on to the next generation. Well, that next generation starts, and in that next generation, we find Caleb and Joshua still alive, as God promised. In fact, they're the leaders of this new generation. Caleb is the leader of one of the tribes. Joshua is the leader of the whole dang thing. And they are leading the people, and they do the very thing that God had promised, had told the other generation to do. They believed God's promise, and they led them into this promised land. And they led the second generation in, and they started to conquer. Victory after victory, started to take possession of the land that God had promised, just as he said he would do. And I tell you all that story because this is the part of the story I really want to capture. It's 7 years later. They're 7 years into this conquest campaign, but there's unfinished business. And so Caleb, this man of faith, he says, look, there's some unfinished business. So he goes and he has a sit down with Joshua. They go and let's have a conversation. So he goes to see Joshua, who's the leader, and we see it in Joshua chapter 14. And Caleb says to Joshua, he says, look, hey man, do you remember this? I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh to spy out the land. And I came back, and when I came back, I gave him the word just as it was in my heart. Nevertheless, you remember this, Joshua? Nevertheless, my brothers, they went up with me. They made the people's hearts melt with fear. And remember what they said? They said, look, the people are too strong for us. The cities are too large for us. The fortification is too high. And we saw those descendants of Anak there. Remember that? Joshua says, yeah, man, I was there too. I remember. Caleb says, but I followed the Lord fully. So Moses swore to me on that day, look, the land on which you have set your foot, that's going to be inheritance to you, to your children forever, because you followed the Lord fully. And so now behold, Caleb says to Joshua, the Lord has let me live just as he said he would these 45 years. And now behold, I am 85 years old today. I think this is how we should always announce our birthdays. You wake up and you just gather everyone in the house together and you just say, behold, right? I think, did you do that yesterday? I think you should have done that, right? Behold, I am 85 years old today. And Joshua said, well, happy birthday, man. He's like, thank you. That's not my point. Here's what I want to say. Yes, man, what do you want to say? Sometimes 85 years old, we just kind of ramble. Anyway, Caleb says this, I am still as strong today as I was on the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now. For war or for going out and coming in, doing the work. So, Joshua, Caleb says, now then give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard that the Anakim were there, were their great fortified cities. But perhaps, Caleb says, perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out just as the Lord said. I love this. Because Caleb is, first of all, catch that he's asking for the exact same mission that messed everything up before. The exact same mission that everyone was terrified about, that turned everyone else away. He says, I want that mission. That's the unfinished business that I want to take care of. I want the uphill battle. I want to go into the hill country. I want to take down those fortified walls. I'll knock through those walls to get to those giants. I want to take them on. Caleb is saying, look, I know what I'm asking for. I'm 85 years old. I know there's no guarantee here. There's no guarantee that I'm going to win. But this goal is so worthy that it'll be glorious just to make the attempt. And perhaps, who knows, perhaps God will be with me. Perhaps God will do what only he can do. Perhaps God will do more than I ever could. But I'm going to take this risk. I love this faith of Caleb. Caleb knows for sure that God rewards the risk of obedience. So just to tell you the way it goes, Joshua blesses Caleb. He says, go ahead, take that land. And next chapter, we read that Caleb does, in fact, go in and he drives out 3 of these different tribes of these sons of Anak, and that land becomes his inheritance. Why? Because God rewards the risk of obedience. Risk-taking faith. It's the difference between being a part of God's redemption story or simply spinning out our days in anonymity. Risk-taking faith. I want that kind of faith. I want that kind of faith for all of us. So this story of Caleb, it's a good story. It's a good Old Testament story, but I also believe that it matters for you and me. I believe that it matters for Liberty Church Manzini here today and in the future. I believe it matters for each of us as individuals. Because in this, and I'm going to hit this quickly, there are 5 essential qualities of risk-taking faith. 5 essential qualities that all of us can adopt in our lives to take on risk-taking faith. The first one is this: risk-taking faith starts in the heart. It starts in the heart. Caleb, remember, he told Joshua, look, I came back and I gave the report to Moses just as it was in my heart. Now, the other report, they caused hearts to melt because they were afraid. They came in and they knew what God had promised, but they talked about all of the obstacles and all of the challenges and all of the giants. But I had set my heart on God's word. And so that's what I brought back. Risk-taking faith begins when we make a decision to set our heart on what God says, not on the circumstances that we see. That's where it begins. We first have to make the choice to put our trust in God's word instead of all of those obstacles and the things that might make us feel small. That's number 1. Number 2, risk-taking faith embraces the vulnerability of vision. Now get this, because this was a big deal when Caleb, in spite of all of the negative words, Caleb stands up and says, no, I believe we can do this. I know what I've seen, but no, I believe God's vision that we can go and we can take this land. He stands up and he says, look, this is the vision that God showed me, and so I have to say it. Now, in response to that, he got a lot of mockery. He got a lot of rejection. In fact, they tried to even kill him. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but has God ever, given you a vision for something? Has God ever given you a calling, called you to something, given you a dream? It's a vulnerable thing to go public with that thing. Because you say, hey, this is what I think God's put in my heart. And people say, you'll never do that. That's going to be too hard. Why don't you have a fallback? It's a vulnerable thing to say, no. This is the dream God's given me. This is the vision that God's put in my heart. Because, maybe it won't happen the way you said it would. Maybe people are going to laugh at you. But you know what? Risk-taking faith embraces the vulnerability of vision, because also, perhaps, God will do just like he said he would. Perhaps God will do what you can't do. Perhaps God will do more than you could ever ask or imagine. And he will fulfill his promise and his vision and his dream to you. Number 3, risk-taking faith adds one's own strength to the task. I love that Caleb says, look, I may be 85, but I was just as strong as I was when I was 45. Try me right now. He's like, I'm ready for war. I'm ready to go to work. Caleb says, I'm ready to add my strength to the task. Now, Caleb knows that even when he was in his prime at 40, he didn't have the strength to take on giants in and of himself, right? That's not what he's saying. He's saying, look, I'm going to go and I'm going to give all the strength I have, and I'm going to trust God to be the strength that I don't have. I'm going to add my strength, my wisdom, my experience, everything I got to this task, because I'm going to trust that God will do everything else. Because he knows that God rewards the risk of obedience. Risk-taking faith always involves our action. Risk-taking faith is not risk-taking wishing. It's not sitting back and hoping God will do something. It's us taking next steps, us taking action. In the New Testament, James tells us that real faith is always demonstrated by follow-through, right? Risk-taking faith involves us taking next steps toward what God has called us to do, knowing that he will have to come in and provide what we don't have. It adds our strength, it adds our wisdom, our research, our effort, our resources to the thing that God has called us to. Number 4, risk-taking faith then enters into miracle territory. I love that God said of Caleb, look, Caleb's got just a different spirit about him. Caleb is a guy who just follows me wholeheartedly. So he says, so I will bring him into the land. Notice that God didn't say, man, Caleb, he's just got a different level of ability. He's going to go take this land. Caleb's got a different kind of spirit. He follows me, so I will bring him into this land. God's going to do what he can't do. That's miracle territory. If we're risk-taking faith says, look, I'm going to step into that space between what I can do and what God has called me to do. If you follow Jesus, it's only a matter of time. You may already be in that place where God calls you to do something, and there's a big gap between what you have when it comes to your resources and your strength and what God is calling you to do. That space in here is called miracle territory. That space in there between what you can do and what God's called you to do, that's where faith lives its best life. That's where you pray your best prayers because you need God to show up. Because if God doesn't show up in this space, you're going to fall down on your face. This is the space where God surprises you. And this, most importantly, is the space where God gets all the glory. Risk-taking faith depends on God to do what only he can do. And number 5, lastly, risk-taking faith lives to tell God's story. When Caleb says perhaps, he says, perhaps the Lord will be with me and I will drive them out just as the Lord has spoken. What he's saying there is perhaps God will let me be a part of the story that he's writing for his people. Caleb knows something that I think we're often prone to forget. The story of our lives only matters wherever it intersects with God's story. I know that can be offensive to our egos, but it's the truth, and it's also very freeing when we embrace it. The story of our lives, it only matters where it intersects with God's story. Obsessed with our stories, personally, we will wander for 38 years until we die. But when we put ourselves and we live our lives to be a part of God's story, then we're a part of something that has begun before us and will go on until the day of Christ Jesus. Living for ourselves to try to make our name famous, to try to build our kingdoms, it's just signing up for wandering in the wilderness. But because of the incredible love of God, because of the grace of Jesus, he has invited every one of us to be a part of his story. Every one of us to be a part of his redemption story on earth and in history. For our cities, for our nations, for the whole world. And so we all have that choice to be obsessed with our own story or to instead live our lives to tell God's story. Risk-taking faith finds its purpose in the plans of God. You know, Pastor Lou and Zinti, they have a great vision for Liberty Church Manzini. For this next year, for years to come. I mean, we're celebrating, the fruit of that even yesterday and today. But they're already asking, all right, what's next? What's the next chapter? What's the next part of the story? What's God calling us? What big thing is God calling us into next? Do you want to know what it is? Do you want to know? I'll tell you. I'm not going to tell you. What I am going to do is I'm going to personally invite you to come back next week to Vision Sunday. Because we're going to have Vision Sunday right here. And Pastor Lou and Zinti are going to share the vision that God has put in their heart because it started in their heart. He's going to share the vision that God has given, and Carrie and I are going to we'll be here via TV magic, and we're going to be sharing the vision that God has put in our heart for all of Liberty Church Global, and what God is leading us into as a global church. But what I want to do is I want to encourage you to come and to be a part of that, and to hear what God has already started, and invite Him to put that in your heart as well. And I will tell you, though, that if we're going to see these visions that God has given us to become reality, it means we're going to have to step into some miracle territory. And we're going to have to add some of our strength, our own strength, and our own effort to the task. But their goals so worthy that it'll be glorious just to make the attempt. And look, if you do, perhaps the Lord will be with us. Perhaps God will do what only He can do. Perhaps God will remove every obstacle and move every heart. Perhaps God will equip you with more than you need to do more building improvements you could ever even imagine. Perhaps God will use Liberty Manzini to be a shining light throughout all Eswatini. Perhaps God will give us visions that we haven't even seen yet. What we do know is that God rewards the risk of obedience. So let me end this way. How about you personally? How about you as an individual? Is there something that God has been speaking to you? Is there something that the Holy Spirit has been calling you to? A vision He's given you, a dream He's given you? Is there something that God is asking you to step into or to step out of? It could be a matter of obedience. Like maybe there's a relationship that He's been calling you to reconcile. Maybe there's a habit He's been calling you to break, an area of sin He's calling you to cut out. Maybe it's something to do with your finances, or it's a next step in your personal walk with God. Or maybe it's something altogether life-altering. Maybe it's a calling. Maybe it's someplace He's calling you to go, something He's calling you to do. Maybe it's a vision, it's a mission that He's calling you to that's bigger than you. Whatever it is, I don't know what it is, obviously, but whatever it is, let me encourage you. Since this risk-taking faith starts in your heart, let me encourage you to set your eyes on what God is telling you to do and not on the circumstances and the obstacles that would keep you from doing it. Let me encourage you to embrace the vulnerability of vision. If God is calling you to do something, if he's put a vision, a dream in your heart, can I encourage you to today tell somebody about it? Embrace the vulnerability. Listen, I think God is calling me to do this. And then add your strength to the task. Look, take some next steps. Do what you can do. And enter into miracle territory. Set goals this year that you know you cannot accomplish if God doesn't show up. Live your life to tell God's story. Surrender the delusion of your own fame and find your purpose in God's plans. Because look, I don't know what God is calling you personally to do, but I know if God is calling you to do it, it's a goal so worthy that it'll be glorious just to make the attempt. And I know that God will reward the risk of obedience. So I do want to ask the band to return at this point. Because I want to end just by saying this. It's the best, perhaps, verse in all of the Bible. It's the most, I think, just the most powerful, perhaps, verse in all of the Bible. It's found in the book of Acts, chapter 17. Paul is talking to some people who do not have a relationship with God. They're people who have been living their lives for themselves, who have been obsessed with their own fame, their own name. People who don't know God. They haven't been living for him. And he says to them, he starts out by saying, look, God has created everything. He's created everyone. And he's been active throughout history and in the story of humanity, in every generation, throughout every nation. And he's made himself known in ways that some people have seen and other people's haven't. But, he says, now he sent Jesus. Jesus has come, and Jesus has died for our sins, and he's raised from the dead so that we can have a relationship with God that we never could have had before. And he concludes all of this about God by saying, and Jesus by saying this, God did this so that people, so that you and me would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. Catch this. He's saying that Jesus has done everything that he has done. That Jesus came to earth, demonstrated who God is to us, that he died on the cross and rose from the dead with no guarantee that it was going to work in your life. With no guarantee that you would give your life to him. He did all of that because the goal of you knowing him and living the life he's created you to live, that goal was so worthy that it was glorious for him to just even make the attempt. This is how much Jesus loves you. That with no guarantee that you would accept him and that you would follow him, he laid down his life for you. Because perhaps you just might reach out. Perhaps you might find him. And he's not far. He's right here with you. He loves you. He desires you to know him. He desires you to be a part of his story, to live the life bigger than you could ever imagine, to live the life that he has called you and created you to live. So this morning, before we end today, I just want to give everyone an opportunity. Because maybe your next step when it comes to risk-taking faith, maybe your next step when it comes to living the full life that God has for you, your next step is to get right with God. And to say, I need to put my trust in Jesus. To let him be the Savior he came to be. To let him be the leader of my life.